What is the best webcam of 2022? I think it's between these two, but I'm testing 6 cameras in total. The Razer Kiyo Pro, the Dell UltraSharp 4K, the Brio 4K, which was one of my favorites in last year's review and has since come down in price, the iPhone 13 Pro using re-incubate camo, the Elgato Facecam, which Elgato sent me but have no idea what I'm going to say, and finally the Canon M50 Mark II with a cam link, which would have made the top 2 if not for price. I'll come back to when I think this option makes sense. So I bought every camera in this video with my own money except for Facecam. But Elgato's not sponsoring this video, they won't get to see it before it's posted, and this cam link I bought myself. But it is the case that I think the best webcam of 2022 is either the iPhone 13 Pro or the Elgato Facecam. But I'm going to take you through each camera so you can decide for yourself. I'll show you them in bright white lighting, which is where they all look their best. I'll show you them in low lighting and how they do with a green screen. And that's a lot of comparisons, so I put chapter markers in. And let's start with the iPhone 13 Pro first. I've tethered my phone to my computer and I'm using a program called Re-Incubate Camo, which I love because it gives so much control over the image. The free version goes up to 720p with a watermark. I'm using the paid version so I can get 1080p and full image control. What can I say? I think it looks great. This phone can do portrait mode on video, though it doesn't always get it right. Still like it though. It's a total low light beast, though all these cameras are not looking their best selves in low lighting. It green screens very cleanly in OBS, and at this point you might be wondering why you would go with anything else. A few considerations. If your phone is your webcam, you can't use it during a meeting. And you'll probably need to mount it. I use this thing in a stand. Just make sure that you don't accidentally call emergency services, because your holder is holding down the power and volume buttons. Yeah. Now you might be wondering why the paid version of Re-Incubate Camo only goes up to 1080 and not 4K. They give 2 reasons. They didn't want to rush this feature, and it might be a bit premature anyway. If your platform only goes up to 1080 and you give it a 4K video, the platform will downscale that image to 1080. It's better to feed in the native resolution to begin with, which might mean choosing 1080 over 4K anyways. Now, Facecam. I was an Elgato fan long before they sent me this camera, but wow. Of all the webcams I've tested, it's the one that has the closest look to a mirrorless camera. A lot of times, webcam images can look sort of two-dimensional because they lack nuance in the shadows and highlights. But depending on how you tweak the image, you can get it looking pretty dynamic. But you can get so many looks out of this camera, which is true of the iPhone too. It's a testament to the quality of the cameras, but also how much control the software gives you. With Facecam, you can basically take this into full manual mode, setting ISO, frame rate, shutter speed, white balance, and after you do that, that image will not auto-adjust, which is an issue I've had with some of the other cameras, especially around exposure. At 60 frames per second, that motion is so smooth, though you need to combine this with a fast shutter speed to get the full effects. For example, here's 60 frames per second, but at a slow shutter speed. Just keep in mind that at these high frame rates, high shutter speeds, you'll probably get more noise unless you add more light. And not all platforms support 60 frames per second. Now, my hair is always a challenge when green screening, but I was surprised that the iPhone got it cleaner with less wiggles. Now, it's a relatively easy fix, I just need to add a bit more light to separate my hair and reduce the noise in the image. In terms of low light, it does all right, but if you're going to invest in this camera, or any camera really, having some bright white lights can really add a lot. I'll go through the lighting setup that I'm using at the end. Facecam doesn't have a microphone. I'm totally kidding, I don't care at all. If you see my other videos, then you know where I stand on this. Facecam maxes out at 1080p, but for the reasons I mentioned with Re-Incubate Camo, this isn't really an issue for me. Besides, color detail, nuance in the shadows and highlights, that's what I care about more than resolution. I mean, this image from the M50 is in 1080 and it looks awesome. But let's look at one that does do 4K, and that's the Dell UltraSharp. Now there is a particular benefit to this camera having 4K, and that is to give it enough resolution for its auto-tracking feature. I'm not sure I'd use this personally. I mean, most of the cameras are so wide-angled that I'm always in the frame, but it is a cool feature, and overall, I really like this camera. It's definitely not its best self in low lighting, but who is? It also doesn't have a microphone, but like with the Elgato, I'm fine with that. Why wasn't it in my top 2? Well, it likes to auto-adjust on exposure and especially white balance. Now you can set white balance manually, but to me the options seem either too yellow or too blue. The image also looks a bit flatter to me compared to the others. It has less paint by number circles when I put them into false color, which is a tool that helps you see highlights and shadows in your shots. Now there is a high dynamic range button for this camera. It seems to add some brightness and detail, but I think it looks a little unnatural. I'm not sure why. Compared to my phone and Facecam, it struggles a bit more in green screening challenging things. A hair light would have benefited it here, but it does just fine with clean lines. None of these are deal breakers to me because I think the image looks really good, but these are the reasons that it wasn't in my top 2. Okay, let's talk about the Kiyo. The Razer Kiyo Pro was the camera that gave me the most trouble, and I gave it the fastest, nicest port directly on my motherboard. It can look really good, and I've seen the price come way down from $200, so. But here are my issues. Look at the green screen. By the time I've adjusted white balance to fix this blue hue, I'm way too yellow. It also likes to auto-adjust. It's pretty sensitive to changes in the environment. It's hard for me to get the camera looking exactly where I want it and get it to stay that way. You may have also read that it has some trouble with autofocus. I had some issues with this too. You can set focus manually, which is what I did here, although now I'm wondering if it's just a tiny bit off. Now, all of these issues might be improved with a firmware update, but mine isn't compatible. This seems to be an issue with the early batches. When I contacted support, they said I'd need to send the camera in and they'd send me a new one. Maybe they've sold enough early stock that this isn't a problem anymore. But there are things that I like about the Kiyo. Really good detail in the shadows and highlights, lower price, really smooth motion, and less noise at these high frame rates, high shutter speeds. I can really see that when I green screen with it. Even though it's not looking great here, I would say that in all my tests it actually does pretty well in low-ish light. And when it's at such a discount compared to the others, I think it's at least worth considering. Given all these new cameras, where does the Brio 4K stand? The Brio is still a very good camera in ideal conditions, but it has less dynamic range than the newer cameras. You can see that my blue sweater almost looks black, even though my face is very bright. The Brio really doesn't like this sweater. It seems to throw off the automatic adjustments, especially if you add a green screen into the mix, which is why I threw on a pink sweater for these other shots. It is hard to get my hair looking clean with the green screen, but that has been true for every camera except the iPhone so far. It's the noisiest in low light, but listen, this camera is now several years old and the rest were released in 2021. I'm honestly pretty impressed with how well it's held up. If you can get a good deal on it and you have the lighting to support it, I think it's a great option. Now, the M50 Mark II is in a league of its own, both in look and in price. When is mirrorless worth the investment? The reason I've gone for this option is that I do a ton of media and presenting, and I wanted a long-term solution that would really look professional for a long time. It's a rabbit hole because now I own a dummy battery and a cam link, but I love gear. There are a lot of mirrorless cameras to choose from. I've only tested some of the Canon range so far. And no, I'm not sponsored by Canon. I wish. Unlike its predecessor, which I covered in last year's video, this one does clean HDMI. It looks especially great in 4K, but the autofocus is less stable. It green screens very well, though I can see it would have benefited from a hair light. Apparently only the iPhone didn't care. I will say though, the gap is getting less wide. I am really impressed with these comparisons with the iPhone and Facecam. Now, to be fair, lighting is important for all of the cameras to look the best. So I want to show you exactly how I set that up. I actually have a whole video on lighting and the principles are the same. I want bright lights on either side of me. I'm using this aperture light on one side and a cheap smaller light on the other. The small light makes a great highlighter, but it doesn't have a lot of surface area. I probably wouldn't get two of these. For the second light, I'd get one with bigger surface area, so it's not as harsh. But it does cool to warm light, it does RGB too, and it has great battery life charged through USB. Now, the light on my left is the aperture. I love this light. I'm actually using it as my hair light, but I don't necessarily recommend it for everyone because it's pricey and you have to get these big batteries and then a charger for the big batteries. I think you can get away with the cheaper option. I also have two soft boxes pointed directly at the wall to get some super soft lighting bouncing off because this room is really dark, which is a trick if you're in a small space. Just be careful because they can get really hot. Softboxes are going to be pretty overkill for most people. You can get pretty far with some well-placed lamps and a screened window, which is what I cover in the $0 lighting video. But my goal with these webcams was to get them looking as good as I could possibly get them, which meant busting out some of the studio lights. If you've been following my channel, then you know this is my 5th video ever, and it has been a while. It's been a difficult year, as I'm sure it's been for you too. To my 33,807 subscribers, thank you. I do have more content planned, and I'm hoping to get it out in a timely manner. In 2022, let's do this. What is the best? If your platform... I'm really curious if there... 3 new releases. Oh, not this one. The Razer Kiyo Pro. The Razer Kiyo Pro. The Razer Kiyo... Thanks for watching, and here are 2 of my other 4 videos.